Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to break down the Orioles minor league coaching staff announcements for the 2025 season, all the way from AAA Norfolk down to the Dominican Summer League. And it's an interesting group this year in that we have some familiar names in new places as well as some new coaches joining the organization. So we'll be breaking that down tonight on Orioles on the Verge, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, to NHL and UFC, BetOnline is your number one sports betting source for the new year. Every touchdown to three-pointer and hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Last week, the Orioles announced their slate of minor league coaches along with their broader player development staff for the 2025 season, and there were some changes as was to be expected with the likes of Forrest Herman, Sermon Johnson, and Buck Britton moving up in the organization. And what that has led to is some coaches that have been with the Orioles for a long time moving into different roles this year, and some other new coaches joining the organization entirely. And we will have that covered tonight as we look at every coaching staff from AAA Norfolk down to the Dominican Summer League. But we'll just kind of give first a broad overview of our impression really of this group as a whole and how we see them fitting into the Orioles system, which has made a lot of progress in player development under Mike Elias and his regime. So, Nick, starting with you, what are your thoughts on the coaching staffs?
I think just generally speaking, before we dive in and go team by team there, just the biggest thing that stands out to me is the vast majority of managers and coaches and instructors are back in 2025. I think it was in John Muley's piece at the Banner, how Anthony Villa had said like 50% of the coaches, 50% of the positions down on the farm are manned by someone new this year, not necessarily someone new to the organization, but people within the organization moving on to different roles this year. That's not crazy or unique or anything. Turnover movement is high, but I think this is a really good sign that how the Orioles viewed development last year down on the farm, and they kept most of this staff. And a lot of the staff, as you just mentioned, they brought up to the major leagues. So I think this farm system is very healthy. I don't care what a top 100 list says and the takeaways that more casual fans have about those lists. The system it's still strong and it's progressing in a way that I think the organization is obviously pleased with. And that's shown by these coaching staffs, a lot of very familiar faces this year.
Yeah, I agree. I always, if there's one thing I trust about this organization, it's that they are going to put the right people in place to develop the prospects in the minor leagues. That's been the name of the game since Elias took over, and I don't think anything's changed, even though a lot of the names and faces have changed. Some of them are with the majors, some of them have moved up. I like that Felipe Alou got moved up to AAA, so he'll presumably be around Basayo and Frederick Bencosme this season a lot, and hopefully more international guys as time goes on. But yeah, I'm excited to learn about some of the new guys, and I know Nick posted one of the pitching coaches and their track record. Was it the new Delmarva guy who he just increases strikeouts wherever he goes. So you got to love that. So yeah, I'm very excited to learn more about these guys as the season gets going. We hear more from them and just how things develop. But I trust that the Orioles know what they're doing in this department. So I'm all in on, and look, Justin Ramsey's still here. So he's been around forever. Not that you're old or anything, Justin, if you're listening, but yeah, I just, this is what the Orioles have aced ever since 2019. So I'm happy.
Let's dive right in, and we'll start with Norfolk and Bowie. And I'll just say at the onset that we're going to focus on the more on-field roles, so no disrespect meant to the people in training and strength and conditioning staffs who do incredible work in the minor leagues. Just that we have a lot of names to rattle off tonight. We want to talk about the people we have some insight into, but know that if we're not mentioning someone here, that doesn't mean that their role to the Orioles and whatever contribution they have isn't significant. Let's start with Norfolk, where they are going to have a new manager, and it's Tim Fedorovich, who comes over to the Orioles after managing AAA Toledo in the Tigers organization last year. He's got an extensive background in baseball. He retired after the 2021 campaign, following a 13-year professional career that included parts of 8 seasons in the majors. He then managed AAA Tacoma in the Mariners system in 2022 before being the Major League catching coach for the Tigers in 2023. His coaching staff will include Justin Ramsey, who has been with the Orioles organization for years now, as Bob mentioned, and has done great work with their pitchers. Mike Montville is returning as the hitting coach. Felipe Alou Jr. will move up from Aberdeen, where he was the manager last year, to take over as Norfolk's fundamentals coach. The Tides will also have a development coach as well in Billy Factu. So sorry about that. Billy Factu will be joining Norfolk from Chesapeake as the development coach. So that's your on-field staff at Norfolk. And then down in Bowie, Roberto Mercado is returning as the manager for the Bay Sox this year. He is going to be joined by hitting coach Josh Bunselmeyer, as well as fundamentals coach Chase Sebi. Pitching coach Jordy Henry, meanwhile, will also return, or actually make the jump up from Delmarva, along with development coach Calvin Christensen. So these two staffs reflect some of the movement we were talking about at the onset of this show, but solid groups overall. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Fun group. And to begin with Norfolk's manager there, Fedorovich, and I think kind of this will also answer AJ's question there. Why didn't Mercado get a promotion to Norfolk? I think we all were kind of assuming that he probably would. We were thinking Buck Britton was going to move up, and then when that was officially announced, kind of assumed Mercado would just continue his climb. But when you look at Fedorovich's background even more, he played with the Houston Astros when Mike Elias and company were over there. He's only 37, young guy. Playing days aren't far behind him. More than a decade in pro ball with a few different teams. I believe he also played with the Cubs when Brandon Hyde was coaching in Chicago. So this organization knows him very well. I imagine he knows Elias and company and Brandon Hyde very well. And so when you're the AAA manager, I imagine there's a lot of conversations you're having with Brandon Hyde and on the big league side of things, with shuffling guys back and forth, rehab assignments, although I guess the rehab assignments more so take place closer to Baltimore and Aberdeen and Bowie, but there's a lot of shuffling going back and forth. And to bring a guy that I imagine has a pretty tight relationship with both Hyde and Elias, I think that's why he got the job. And it's no disrespect to Mercado, obviously. He's done a fantastic job in this organization, but I'm interested to see what he brings. I know Anthony Villa's quote on him was he can be kind of like a hard-nosed guy, and I think he's going to be help there to prepare some of these younger prospects, better prepare some of these younger prospects for the big leagues. And yeah, Felipe Alou is just 18 years in the organization. He's been at multiple levels. I think getting him up to Norfolk was pretty interesting. He was Aberdeen's manager last year. He was Delmarva's manager the year before that to help transition a lot of those first wave of international prospects that we saw come into the organization. They brought in, Daniel Fajardo. They brought Felipe Alou to be the manager. A lot of Spanish-speaking coaches to help ease that transition, and that really worked. So I wonder if they're kind of getting Alou adjusted to AAA in anticipation of more international prospects reaching that level in the near future. So, yeah, good for him. Mercado, we talk about Mercado all the time, what he brings to this organization. I think he just had a birthday the other day, and happy birthday. And Freddie Bencosme posted happy birthday to the greatest manager or the greatest coach and a great person. And I feel like that explained it perfectly. The hate to see you go, love to watch you leave tweets, A+ work all around. But I'm very intrigued when you go down to Chesapeake. Imagine I already said Bowie 5 times. I apologize. I'm never going to get used to that this year. But when you get down to Chesapeake, a lot of the same guys like you mentioned. But the interesting thing, Austin Miney was the pitching coach with Chesapeake last year. He's with the Cardinals now. And Jordy Henry moves up from Aberdeen. I think that's awesome because how many top pitching prospects are we talking about? All these breakout guys from last year in Aberdeen, they're going to get to Bowie this year and they're going to have their guy back with them in Jordy Henry. So I think that's pretty cool to keep that continuity going down here in the system. So yeah, I'm excited to watch these guys like Nestor Haman, Trey Gibson, Ferret, Zach Fruit, all these guys we've been talking about over and over again. I'm pretty stoked, even more so now, to watch them in Double A with knowing that the man in charge helped build these guys up last year down in Ohio.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that I can say from my experience around the game with minor league coaching staffs is that although it is the goal of most coaches and managers to move up to the major leagues, the way they're evaluated is not necessarily the same as a player. So just because Mercado is not managing Norfolk this year doesn't mean the Orioles think anything less of him. Sometimes these are based on current needs, and Mercado does a great job at Chesapeake. They're going to have a lot of good prospects there this year. So I think his standing in the organization is still very high. I'm intrigued at the same time, though, by what Fedorovich brings, which is some AAA managing experience, but also some close proximity to the game. Having played recently, having been kind of an up and down guy for his career, I think he has a lot of wisdom he could offer these players.
Long career as a big leaguer says a lot, especially as a catcher. Olympic medal, even on his resume. Like, he's only 37, but I feel like the experience is there. And not to take anything away from Buck Britton, he also had experience as a player, younger guy who connect with the players as well. But I think Fedorovich is a pretty solid addition down there in Norfolk. He's going to bring a pretty valuable resource to these younger guys in the preparation phase, the final step preparation, I think, especially right before they get up to the big leagues.
We'll go down to the A-ball levels now. At Aberdeen, they will have a new manager this year. With Alou moving up to Norfolk, Ryan Gold will take over as the Ironbirds skipper. He is a familiar name in Aberdeen, as he was the development coach for the Ironbirds last season. This will be his first professional managerial job. He'll be joined by Zach Cole as the hitting coach, development coach Adonis Smith, pitching coach Jeremy Heilman, and fundamentals coach Daniel Fajardo. And then down in Delmarva, Colin Woody will manage the Shorebirds for the second straight year. Christian Polson will be the Shorebirds hitting coach, while Casey Day jumps up from development coach in the FCL to become the Shorebirds pitching coach. Casey Buckley will be the Shorebirds development coach this year after being promoted as staff assistant and bullpen catcher from the last few seasons. They'll be joined by a newcomer to the organization in Luis Silvero, who is coming off a fairly recent professional career in the Arizona Diamondback system and also some time coaching in the Diamondback system. So this is kind of a good mix again, where you have some guys that are familiar with the organization, have been around for a while, but then also some younger former players not that far removed from their career joining the Orioles organization for the first time.
Yeah, the interesting thing here is see Ryan Gall as manager of Aberdeen. It's been a pretty quick rise for him. I think just as recently as 2019, he was a student manager at the University of Minnesota. And now 2020, he got hired by the Orioles. It's been 5 years, and now he's the high A manager. He was actually part of the coaching staff that the Orioles sent to last year's spring breakout game. So I think that says a lot about how they viewed him. And if you look at all of his stops in his very young career already, he's what he's brought with him at each level is like this implementation of this data-driven player development technologies with him. And my sense is that he's been in the system for 5 years now. He's also been responsible for organizing camps, like off-season camps for prospects. And so he's worked with, I imagine, the vast majority of players in the system. So I think for a young guy, clearly highly respected by the organization, I almost wonder, because he's going to be working with a lot of guys in their first full years of pro ball, he's someone who can maybe help ease that transition, especially for the younger players, between like bridge that gap between the data and technology that the Orioles use. And some of these guys may be reluctant to that, or they may be unaware of what this data means. And he can help maybe bridge that gap and ease that transition for these guys. Because I just go back to when I was thinking about this, I go back to a conversation I had with a college pitching coach. He's now the pitching coach at University of Maryland, actually. And one thing that made his staffs so great over the years is that he continues to make sure that he understands all the data and all the technology that he uses, but being able to translate that for the players was crucial, because you can tell the guys, here's your data. And he would tell me like, they're just going to throw that paper in the trash and not even read it. Again, we're talking about pro ball, but I think that could be a lot of the same there. Maybe I'm looking too deep into it. I don't know, but shout out to Ryan Gull for that quick promotion there as a young guy in the system.
There's one thing that will forever change the way you sleep, and it's the softest 100% organic cotton bedding from Boll & Branch. You'll fall asleep faster, wrapped in the most luxurious comfort. You'll never sleep hot again with airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and breathable sheets. You'll experience pure comfort on night one and feel your bedding get softer with every wash. Discover the difference with 15% off your first order at bollandbranch.com with code Cumulus. Exclusions apply. See site for details.
And yeah, the pitching coach was the big one. Just looking around for some of these new names, find out who they are, where they're coming from. And Jeremy Heilman, new pitching coach for Aberdeen. He spent the last 2 years in the college ranks, last couple years in the college ranks. But in 2023, he was at Army. And the pitching staff at Army went from 7.2 Ks per nine the year before Heilman arrived to 8.5 Ks per nine when Heilman was there. And then last year he goes to St. Joe's. And at St. Joe's, the year before Heilman arrived, their pitching staff had 8.7 Ks per nine. This past year, 9.9 Ks per nine, which ranked 29th in the NCAA. So wherever Heilman seems to go, the strikeouts tend to follow. And so that's, I think, pretty exciting to see, especially this pitching staff that is likely going to begin the year in Aberdeen. I'm excited to see what kind of strikeout numbers we see with the Ironbirds this year.
I'm going to go back to Goal for a minute because you were talking about his background a little bit, and it struck me that the Orioles are not afraid to be aggressive with some of their coaches. We've seen Anthony Villo transition pretty quickly from being a player to a coach and now the head of player development in the Orioles system. They moved a lot of their coaches up, Sherman Johnson being the most recent example of someone that moved through the system pretty quickly to get to the major leagues. Ryan Fuller before that. It's an interesting trend, and I want to get your thoughts on it. What do you think that they're looking for in these coaches that makes them decide, okay, these guys are going to be the ones that we can fast track a little bit?
I think some of it is what I just mentioned, how that these guys are coming up in this new age technology. They are, when it comes to the data and analytics, they've got a good hold of that, and they're able to easily translate that to the players. Yeah, they're able to connect with these players. Goal, I think, is a little bit unique because I don't think he had like an extensive like college playing career, but a lot of the other guys like Sherman Johnson and Casey Day, you talk about the pitching coach down there in Delmarva. Casey Day was pitched at community college ranks and then at Wichita State and then Iowa. As soon as he graduated, he immediately went back to Kirkwood Community College as a coach for a year. And now 2 years later, he's the pitching coach for Delmarva. I think these are young guys that clearly are able to connect with players. They share the same vision that the Orioles are preaching to these players, and they're able to connect with these guys and translate it well for them and get the most out of their players. I think a lot of the personal relationships as well. It seemed like you go back to Sherman Johnson, for example, first year, he was less than a year removed from playing pro ball, playing indie ball, and he was AA hitting coach. And a lot of those prospects at Bowie gave rave reviews of Sherman Johnson. And now he got a bigger promotion this year already. So I think it's awesome. You're totally moving away from this old school, this is how we're going to do it because it's always been done this way. You're getting younger, more open-minded coaches who are willing to have dialogue with these players. Go back to, it's funny enough, I think it was Billy who posted in Discord a couple of days ago. He brought up the old Drew Rom interview when Drew Rom gave a little Nostradamus take about Jordan Westberg being the leader of the clubhouse well before Westberg made his MLB debut. Turns out that now he is at the major league level. But I go back to what Drew Rom talked about and some of these pitching coaches who are in the organization now just saying like, hey, what are you doing over there? All right, let's work with that. We're not going to throw it in a game yet, but let's work with this in a bullpen. And then once you feel comfortable, we'll have another conversation. All right, you feel better? You want to use it in a game? All right, let's talk about how we're going to implement this in a game. Like there's a lot of that. And even going back to recently is right before the Elias regime. I know I've talked about this on the podcast before, but Brian Gonzalez, if any diehards remember, old pitching prospect Brian Gonzalez in the organization, when he went to Colorado, he did an interview right after he left the Orioles organization. And I don't think other prospects have mentioned the same thing. So I don't think this was like a player who was pissed off that the Orioles had cut him. I think this is a genuine conversation he was having. You go from level to level in this organization, pre-Elias era, it was like everything that I learned and was being taught in low A was dismantled when I get to the next level and taught something completely different. Those coaches didn't even talk to each other. And now I'm doing something completely different and completely throwing off my development. Like, it was a mess. And so I think there's a lot more, as we've seen over the last few years, something that we've highlighted a lot with these minor league coaches. There's a lot of, working together. All these pieces are working together to make this machine run in Baltimore.
Yeah, the cohesion really has been critical to this organization. And I think that with the slate they have this year, they're going to try to keep that going. And we'll go now down to the short season level, starting with the Florida Complex League. Kristen Frias will return as the manager of the FCL Orioles. This will be his 4th straight year in that position and his 6th overall in the organization. He will be joined by pitching coach Adam Blije, Vili Volstetsky as another pitching coach, Tegan Leader hitting coach, along with Jake Ratz. Ramon Sambo, a longtime member of the organization, returns as fundamentals coach alongside Landon Lassiter and James Johnson. Quentin Holmes will be the development staff there with Cade Johnson as the development coach. So a big staff down in the FCL, an important step for a lot of young players. And I think Frias has done a nice job in the last few years of helping to get players integrated as they make the transition from the DSL. And we know that it doesn't always go smooth the first time around, but for the most part, when you've had prospects that have gone there and maybe struggled in their stateside debut, they're able to turn it around the following summer. I think it's a testament to the work that's been done down there the last couple of years.
Yeah, Blade, you might recognize that name. You might recognize JJ Blade. They are related. So I think, keeping these same guys in, but bringing in a couple of, you mentioned Bailey Valetsky. Shout out to Bailey. Bailey was actually the one who was like, hey, we broadcast Dominican Summer League games if you want to watch. And we watched a lot of those games. Jake Ratz, I know, has done a lot of fantastic work with the hitters down there in Dominican Summer League. Look at what these DSL prospects did, that 2024 international signing class. Look what they did in the DSL last year. They're all going to be in the FCL this year. You bring the hitting coach with them. Tegan Leader, shout out to Tegan. I know he's a big Eagles fan, so I'm sure he is hopefully going to get a nice little surprise, nice little celebration before getting back to the grind in minor league spring training. These guys have been down there at this lowest level for a long time for a reason. Because this is, I don't want to say tricky, but I feel like this is a tall task that is underappreciated. The work dealing with these younger kids who are at critical points in their development, where we talk about a lot of these prospects being so risky, they could go way this way or way that way. And I feel like the Orioles have done a really good job of their lower level prospects really being able to hone in and get to full season ball and be effective in full season ball. So I think that's in large part due to these staffs that they've assembled down there in the lower levels.
Absolutely. And Bob, now that you're back, we're on the FCL coaching staff. Do you have anything you want to add about the other staffs at the higher levels of the minor leagues before we wrap up with the Dominican Summer League?
No, not really. Just that Roberto Mercado, I've said it in the past. I'm sure you've said it tonight that I missed it thanks to my 1-year-old. I'm a big fan of Roberto Mercado. Love that he's aggressive on the base paths. I think players love him. I think he's a future major leaguer, as I see Vivek said in the chat. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. But really, I just like everything that's going on in the system. I'm sorry I missed most of this conversation, but that's about it.
Do you have, not to put you on the spot, because I think this is a fascinating one that we talked about for a little bit there, Ryan Gull being Aberdeen's manager, a young guy with no major playing experience. Thoughts on Ryan Gull?
If they like him, I like him. I mean, that's really all I have to go off of. I'm very curious because you said he's at Aberdeen, right? That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, that's my home ballpark. So I'll try to pay attention to him in the dugout when I go to my Ironbirds games this year. But it's interesting to say the least. Maybe it comes to nothing, or maybe he's like some new hot shot. I don't know. Hot shot might be a little negative, but I just mean he might be like, the next big up and comer. So I'm ready to find out.
We'll go down to the Dominican Summer League now, and the Orioles setting the stage once again for 2 Dominican Summer League teams with this announcement. And those squads will be helmed by last year's managers Chris Madeira and Elvis Morel, as they will both manage in the Dominican Summer League this year. Pitching coaches will be Dionis Pascual and John Nowak, while George Bell, the son of 1987 American League MVP, George Bell, will be a hitting coach alongside Jake Welch. Miguel Jablera and Jerry Tavara will be fundamentals coach, with Nick Propodolsky as the development coach. So again, setting the stage here for 2 teams down in the Dominican Summer League. I think that what we've seen from the last couple of years from Madeira and Morel has been pretty good work getting some of the younger players integrated into the farm system. And then there also feels like there has been an uptick in production among the FCL hitters, and a lot of that owes to the work that Kobe Perez and his staff have done, but also to the coaches there, both hitting and pitching, that I think have made these clubs pretty interesting the last few years.
My favorite is whoever came up with the idea to put a camera, standing camera in the DSL behind a plate that we could watch.
That was I think right before you jumped on, that was actually what's it? He's up in the FCL now. Bailey Valetsky. He is now the pitching coach up in the one of the pitching coaches in the FCL. So shout out to Bailey. If you want to hook us up with some feeds in the FCL, Tegan, Adam, anyone listening, that would be fantastic, and we would greatly appreciate that. But I also want to just shout out a couple more guys, or one guy in particular, real quick, because I panicked when we got all these announcements. I'm like, all right, who's left? Because they don't really say like who left, so you got to like put the puzzle pieces together. Who's out? Where are they at? I don't see a name. I don't see our guy Tim DeJean, but Tim DeJean is back, infield coordinator again. He's still back in the organization. So shout out to a friend of the show, Tim DeJean. It's been a while since we've had him on. I feel like we need to get him back on the show.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, make sure you read to the very end, because you'll see a lot of names that we've had as AAA hitting coach, high A pitching coach, like Forrest Herman is now the director of pitching development. There's upper level hitting coordinator Sherman Johnson, lower level hitting coordinator Brink Ambler. So that you'll see a lot of familiar names are still in the organization. They're just more broader scope, using their talents to, I'm sure, help out the other coaches and players as well.
Yeah, and exactly. And for those wondering how the higher level leadership looks in the player development system right now for the Orioles, Matt Blood is the vice president of player development and domestic scouting. Kent Qualls is the Orioles director of minor league operations. He's returning for his 13th season. And Anthony Villa will be in his second year as director of player development and 6th overall in the organization. As a reminder, I touched on their promotions earlier in the show, but Forrest Herman, who was Bowie's pitching coach last year, moves up to director of pitching development, while Sherman Johnson, who was also on Bowie's staff last year, will be the upper level hitting coordinator and an assistant hitting coach on the MLB staff. So a lot of movement around the organization this year, but it still feels like the Orioles are equipped to have success at the minor league level this year with these coaches at the helm. Before we wrap up, Bob, Nick, any final thoughts on this group?
We're 2 weeks away from spring training. That's my final thoughts on this group. They're gonna all get together, come up with some game plans, and then the season's gonna start. So it's always an exciting time when these announcements come out, because it means we're getting closer and closer to real baseball being played again.
Yep. Minor league spring training is, I think somebody had tweeted this. One of the coaches on this list tweeted it out. Minor league spring training is like 16, 17 days away when they'll get started. I know a lot of guys are down there posting videos in the cage together, working out down there in Sarasota. So yeah, this announcement came out earlier this year as well, I believe, a couple weeks earlier, which is a good sign. Again, a lot of familiar faces. Expecting another big year down in the minor leagues this year, as usual.
That does it for this look at the Orioles minor league coaching staffs. We will be back next week to break down all of the latest news in Birdland. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitch. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to sign up to become a member of our Patreon community. You can join at the paying levels for as little as $3 a month and have access to our top 50 prospects countdown, which is rolling right along. Not only will you have access to the new episodes as they are released, but you can go back and listen to every bonus episode for our top 50 countdown so far. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.